Deception requires constant vigilance and meticulous attention to detail because truth possesses an uncanny tendency to reveal itself through the smallest oversight or unexpected circumstance. What transpired on the Family Feud stage in October 2024 demonstrates this principle with remarkable clarity. Steve Harvey had welcomed thousands of contestants over his tenure as host, reading countless survey cards and revealing innumerable answers. However, on this particular afternoon, the reading of a standard survey response would trigger a sequence of revelations that exposed carefully constructed lies, destroyed multiple relationships, and demonstrated that the most elaborate deceptions can collapse from a single moment of careless inattention. The incident serves as a compelling reminder that individuals who build their lives on foundations of dishonesty exist in constant vulnerability to exposure, regardless of how secure they believe their deceptions to be. On this day, one man's confidence that his secrets remained safely hidden would be shattered by 5 words on a game show survey card. Before examining this extraordinary sequence of events that illustrates the inevitable fragility of deception and the importance of living with integrity and transparency, please take a moment to support our channel by selecting the like option and subscribing to ensure you receive these significant Family Feud moments that provide valuable lessons about honesty, accountability, and the consequences of sustained deception. The Donovan family from Seattle, Washington entered the Family Feud stage with enthusiasm and apparent confidence. Leading the group was Christopher Donovan, a 41-year-old technology consultant whose polished presentation and easy charisma suggested professional success and personal stability. Beside him stood a woman he introduced as his wife, Rachel Donovan, an attractive woman in her late 30s who worked as a dental hygienist. Their family team included Christopher's brother Michael, Rachel's sister Jennifer, and Christopher's business associate Derek, creating a composition that represented both family and professional relationships. Steve Harvey conducted the standard pre-game conversation, asking about the family's background and their reasons for appearing on the show. Christopher responded with practiced ease, describing their life in Seattle, their shared interests in outdoor activities and technology, and their excitement about competing on Family Feud. Rachel contributed less to the conversation, offering brief responses when directly addressed, but generally allowing Christopher to dominate the interaction. The dynamic appeared unremarkable to casual observers, merely suggesting that Christopher possessed a more extroverted personality than his spouse. The game commenced with standard energy and competitive spirit. The Donovan family faced the Anderson family from Portland, Oregon, and the early rounds demonstrated strong performance from both teams. Christopher proved to be an effective team captain, coordinating responses and celebrating correct answers with enthusiasm. He appeared relaxed and confident, enjoying the experience without any visible signs of anxiety or concern beyond normal competitive tension. What neither Steve Harvey nor anyone else in the studio could perceive was that Christopher was managing multiple deceptions simultaneously, believing that the controlled environment of a game show posed no threat to the carefully compartmentalized life he had constructed. As the game progressed through several rounds, Christopher maintained his confident demeanor, while Rachel remained notably subdued. Her responses when called upon were appropriate, but delivered without enthusiasm, and her body language suggested discomfort that extended beyond normal nervousness about television appearance. Several audience members later reported noticing that Rachel seemed to be going through motions rather than genuinely enjoying the experience, though at the time these observations registered only as vague impressions rather than clear concerns. Understanding the full magnitude of what would unfold requires comprehensive knowledge of Christopher Donovan's actual circumstances and the elaborate structure of deception he had maintained for several years. The woman introduced as Rachel Donovan was indeed legally married to Christopher, and their marriage of 7 years appeared conventional from external perspectives. Christopher had built a successful technology consulting practice that generated substantial income and allowed them to maintain an affluent lifestyle in Seattle. Rachel worked part-time as a dental hygienist, contributing to household income while managing their home and supporting Christopher's professional endeavors. However, the appearance of domestic normalcy masked significant complications that Christopher had concealed through careful compartmentalization and strategic dishonesty. 3 years prior to the Family Feud appearance, Christopher had begun a relationship with a woman named Melissa Torres, whom he had met through professional networking events in the technology sector. The relationship had evolved from professional acquaintance to personal involvement over several months, eventually becoming a sustained affair that Christopher maintained through frequent business travel and elaborate scheduling. The affair itself represented only one dimension of Christopher's deception. Approximately 18 months into his relationship with Melissa, Christopher made the extraordinary decision to enter into a second marriage without divorcing Rachel. He accomplished this through exploitation of legal complexities across state lines, marrying Melissa in Nevada while maintaining his legal marriage to Rachel in Washington. He justified this illegal bigamy through rationalizations about loving both women, believing he could maintain separate relationships indefinitely, and convincing himself that what neither woman knew would not harm them. Christopher's ability to sustain this arrangement required meticulous management of his time, finances, and communications. He maintained separate residences in Seattle and Las Vegas, convincing Rachel that his technology consulting work required extended periods in Nevada, while telling Melissa that he needed to maintain a residence in Seattle for specific clients and projects. He managed 2 sets of relationships, 2 households, and 2 completely separate lives with careful attention to preventing any intersection or discovery. The financial resources required for this arrangement were substantial, but Christopher's consulting income and his willingness to engage in questionable financial practices provided necessary funding. The Family Feud appearance had been Rachel's suggestion 6 months earlier as an activity they might enjoy together as a way to reconnect after what she perceived as distance growing between them due to Christopher's extensive travel schedule. Christopher had agreed to the appearance because refusing would have raised questions he preferred to avoid, and because he believed the controlled environment of a game show posed no risk to his carefully maintained deceptions. He had assembled a team that included his brother Michael, who was aware of Christopher's situation and had been convinced to maintain silence out of misguided family loyalty, Rachel's sister Jennifer, who had no knowledge of Christopher's double life, and his business associate Derek, who knew about Melissa but believed that Christopher had divorced Rachel before marrying again. What Christopher failed to anticipate was the unpredictable nature of game show questions and the possibility that survey responses might inadvertently reference circumstances that would expose his deceptions. He had not considered that among the thousands of possible survey questions that Family Feud might present, some would touch on topics that could trigger recognition or revelation. He had grown comfortable in his ability to manage information and control narratives, and that comfort had created a dangerous complacency about potential exposure. Christopher's confidence that his secret was secure rested on several assumptions that would prove fatally flawed. He believed that the geographic and social separation between his 2 lives provided sufficient protection against discovery. He trusted that the people aware of various aspects of his situation would maintain discretion either from loyalty or from their own interests in avoiding complications. Most significantly, he failed to recognize that deception of this magnitude created countless points of potential failure, and that sustaining such elaborate lies indefinitely represented a statistical impossibility rather than merely a challenging undertaking. The game continued with both the Donovan and Anderson families, demonstrating strong performance and competitive spirit. The Donovan family had taken a slight lead heading into the later rounds, and Christopher's confidence remained high. He celebrated correct answers enthusiastically, encouraged his team members, and appeared to be thoroughly enjoying the experience. Rachel's subdued demeanor continued throughout, but Christopher either failed to notice or chose not to address her obvious discomfort in any meaningful way. During the 4th round of the main game, Steve Harvey read a question that would initiate the sequence of events leading to Christopher's exposure. The question asked contestants to name something that people lie about to their spouse. The question itself was standard Family Feud fare, touching on common relationship dynamics in a manner designed to be humorous while remaining relatable to broad audiences. Christopher was not at the buzzer for this particular question, so he stood with his team awaiting the responses from the contestants who would answer first. The opposing team provided answers that appeared on the board, including predictable responses such as spending money, where they were going, and what they were doing. When control passed to the Donovan family, Rachel's sister Jennifer was next to answer. She provided the response, having another relationship, which Steve repeated for clarity before turning to reveal whether it appeared on the survey board. The answer was indeed on the board as the number 3 response, worth 14 points. The studio audience applauded the successful answer, and the game continued with additional responses being offered and revealed. Christopher had maintained his composure throughout this exchange, showing no visible reaction to the question or the answers beyond standard game show enthusiasm. However, what he failed to notice in his focus on the game was that Rachel had become very still when the question was asked and had watched his face carefully when Jennifer provided her answer about having another relationship. Her observation of his studied casualness in that moment registered as significant in a way that previous vague concerns had not, creating the first concrete suspicion that Christopher might be hiding something substantial. The round concluded with the Donovan family winning the points and maintaining their lead. The game proceeded to the final round before fast money, with both families having opportunities to take control and secure victory. The energy in the studio remained high, and Christopher continued to perform well as team captain, demonstrating quick thinking and good strategic judgment. To all appearances, the Donovan family was on track for a successful game show experience that would conclude with either victory or respectable defeat, followed by a return to their normal lives. However, during a commercial break before the final round, Rachel made a decision to act on the suspicions that had crystallized during the previous question. She quietly approached Jennifer and asked her sister to observe Christopher carefully during the remaining game, particularly during any questions or answers that touched on relationships, honesty, or personal life. Jennifer initially dismissed the request as paranoid anxiety, but something in Rachel's expression and tone convinced her to pay attention. The two women returned to their positions for the final round with a shared heightened awareness of Christopher's reactions and behavior. The final round determined that the Donovan family would advance to fast money, having accumulated sufficient points to win the main game. Christopher celebrated the victory enthusiastically, and the team prepared for the final segment that would determine whether they would win the $20,000 grand prize. Steve Harvey explained the fast money format and selected Christopher and Rachel as the two family members who would answer the 5 questions, with Christopher going first while Rachel was taken backstage to prevent her from hearing the questions and answers. Christopher approached the fast money podium with confidence, ready to answer the 5 questions to the best of his ability. Steve began the rapid-fire questioning, and Christopher provided responses that demonstrated reasonable judgment and quick thinking. His answers to the first 4 questions were solid, accumulating a respectable score that would require Rachel to contribute approximately 60 points to reach the 200-point threshold necessary for victory. Christopher completed his round without incident and appeared satisfied with his performance as he rejoined his family members while Rachel was brought back to the stage. Rachel took her position at the fast money podium with visible nervousness that Steve attributed to normal anxiety about performing under pressure on national television. He offered encouragement and reassurance before beginning the questioning process. Rachel answered the first 3 questions adequately, providing responses that added points to the family total and moved them closer to the winning threshold. The atmosphere in the studio was tense with anticipation, as it appeared likely but not certain that the Donovan family would achieve the necessary score. The 4th question in the fast money round asked contestants to name a city where people go to start a new life. Rachel paused briefly before responding, Las Vegas. A logical answer given that city's reputation for reinvention and fresh starts. Steve repeated the answer and turned to reveal whether it appeared on the survey board. Las Vegas was indeed present as the number 2 answer, worth 29 points. The studio audience applauded, and it became clear that the Donovan family would almost certainly reach the 200-point threshold required for victory. However, when Steve read the number 1 answer on the survey card for context and completeness, he stated that the top response had been Las Vegas or Phoenix to escape a marriage. The phrasing was specific and detailed in the way that survey responses sometimes captured particular cultural associations or patterns. Steve read it with his characteristic delivery, not recognizing any special significance beyond the standard revelation of survey results. However, the words created an immediate and profound reaction in multiple people simultaneously. Rachel's face transformed from nervous anticipation to shocked recognition. Christopher's confident expression shifted to visible horror as he realized the specific phrasing of the survey response. Michael, Christopher's brother who knew about the bigamy situation, closed his eyes as though in pain, understanding immediately that the survey answer had inadvertently referenced the exact circumstances of Christopher's deception. Several audience members who had been watching the family dynamics with casual interest suddenly leaned forward, sensing that something significant had occurred, though not yet understanding the specifics. Rachel turned slowly from the survey board to look directly at Christopher, and in that moment of eye contact, he understood that his deception had been exposed through the random coincidence of a survey response that happened to describe his exact situation with uncanny precision. The color drained from his face, and his expression of panic confirmed Rachel's sudden suspicion in a way that eliminated any possibility of innocent explanation or misunderstanding. Steve Harvey, observing this exchange, recognized that something had shifted dramatically but did not yet comprehend the full situation. Rachel stepped away from the Fast Money podium and addressed Christopher directly in a voice that trembled with emotion but remained clear and audible throughout the studio. She asked him a simple question. "Is that what you did, Christopher? Did you go to Las Vegas to escape our marriage?" The question hung in the air with devastating weight, and the studio fell completely silent as everyone present recognized that they were witnessing something far more significant than standard game show drama. Christopher opened his mouth to respond, but no words emerged, his usual facility with language and explanation completely failing in the face of this unexpected confrontation. Rachel continued speaking, her voice growing stronger as she articulated suspicions that had been building for months, but had never crystallized into concrete accusations until this moment. She stated that Christopher had been spending increasing amounts of time in Las Vegas for supposed business purposes, that his explanations had become vague and defensive when questioned, that financial irregularities had appeared that he dismissed or explained away, and that his behavior had changed in ways that suggested he was maintaining secrets. She asked him directly whether he had established a second life in Las Vegas, and whether that life included another relationship or even another marriage. The specificity of the question, asked in front of hundreds of witnesses and television cameras, created a moment from which Christopher could not retreat or deflect. His brother Michael, unable to maintain silence in the face of direct confrontation, made the situation exponentially worse by attempting to defend Christopher with an explanation that instead confirmed the accusation. Michael stated that Christopher had not abandoned his marriage, but rather had made complicated choices about maintaining relationships in multiple locations, inadvertently revealing that there was indeed another relationship and that Michael had been aware of it. The revelation created immediate chaos in the studio. Rachel began crying while simultaneously demanding complete information about what Christopher had been doing in Las Vegas and who else was involved. Christopher's business associate Derek, who had believed Christopher divorced before marrying Melissa, suddenly realized that he had been meddled about the timeline and legal status of Christopher's relationships. Jennifer, Rachel's sister, moved to support Rachel while confronting Michael about his knowledge and complicity in Christopher's deception. Steve Harvey stood attempting to manage a situation that had escalated far beyond anything in standard game show experience, recognizing that what was unfolding represented serious personal crisis rather than entertainment. Christopher, cornered and exposed, initially attempted to minimize and deflect before the weight of evidence and the number of witnesses made denial impossible. He admitted that he had married another woman in Las Vegas, that he had been maintaining 2 separate marriages and households for approximately 18 months, and that he had believed he could sustain this arrangement indefinitely without either woman discovering the truth. The admission confirmed bigamy, a criminal offense in addition to representing profound betrayal of both Rachel and Melissa. The studio audience reacted with audible shock and disapproval, many people unable to comprehend the level of deception and compartmentalization required to maintain such an arrangement. The immediate aftermath of the revelation involved Steve Harvey making the decision to stop taping and clear the studio to allow the Donovan family privacy to process what had been exposed. However, the damage had been done in the most public manner possible, with cameras and witnesses documenting Christopher's admission of bigamy on national television. The footage would become evidence in both criminal proceedings and divorce cases that would follow. Rachel left the studio in a state of shock, supported by her sister Jennifer and accompanied by production staff who helped arrange immediate transportation and ensured she had resources and support contacts for the crisis she was experiencing. Christopher faced immediate legal jeopardy from his admission of bigamy, a felony offense that carries significant criminal penalties. His attorney, contacted within hours of the taping, advised him to make no further statements and to prepare for both criminal charges and civil proceedings from the divorces that would inevitably follow. The public nature of his confession on television eliminated any possibility of claiming misunderstanding or negotiating quiet resolution. The King County Prosecutor's Office in Washington initiated an investigation within days, and criminal charges were filed within 2 weeks of the Family Feud taping. The revelation also created immediate crisis for Melissa Torres, the second woman Christopher had married in Las Vegas. She had been completely unaware of Christopher's continuing marriage to Rachel, having believed his representations that he was divorced. When contacted by investigators and informed of the situation, Melissa experienced profound shock similar to Rachel's reaction. She recognized that her marriage to Christopher was legally invalid, that she had been deceived about fundamental facts of his life, and that she bore the social stigma of being characterized as the other woman despite having believed herself to be a legitimate spouse. The emotional trauma for both women was substantial and would require extensive processing and support. The professional consequences for Christopher were severe and immediate. His technology consulting practice depended on reputation and client trust, both of which were destroyed by the revelation of his criminal deception. Major clients terminated contracts within days of the news becoming public, unwilling to maintain business relationships with someone whose judgment and integrity had been so thoroughly compromised. His business associate Derek ended their professional relationship immediately, recognizing both ethical concerns and practical business risks of continued association. Christopher's income, which had been substantial and necessary to fund his expensive dual household arrangement, collapsed almost overnight. Steve Harvey addressed the incident extensively across his various media platforms, using it as a teaching moment about the inevitable exposure of deception and the cascading consequences of dishonesty. He explained that the survey response that triggered the revelation was a random occurrence, but that Christopher's deception had created countless potential points of failure, and that exposure through one mechanism or another had been statistically inevitable. He emphasized that individuals who build lives on foundations of lies exist in constant vulnerability regardless of how secure they believe their secrets to be. 6 months following the devastating Family Feud revelation, both Rachel and Melissa had initiated divorce proceedings against Christopher and were cooperating with criminal prosecution. The legal proceedings were complicated by the bigamy situation, requiring careful coordination between attorneys to protect both women's interests while navigating the unusual circumstances. Rachel's divorce included claims for fraud and sought compensation for the emotional harm and financial losses caused by Christopher's deception. Melissa's annulment proceedings addressed the invalidity of her marriage, while seeking remedies for the financial and emotional damages she had suffered through Christopher's misrepresentations. The criminal case proceeded through the court system, with Christopher ultimately accepting a plea agreement that included a felony conviction for bigamy, probation rather than imprisonment due to his lack of prior criminal history, significant fines, and restitution payments to both women. The conviction resulted in additional professional consequences, including loss of certain business licenses and professional certifications that required maintenance of good character and legal compliance. Christopher's brother Michael faced social and familial consequences for his knowledge and complicity in the deception, with many family members and friends distancing themselves from someone who had knowingly participated in sustaining such harmful lies. 1 year after the Family Feud incident, Rachel had established a new life characterized by independence and recovery from the trauma of betrayal. The divorce settlement provided her with appropriate financial support and property division, allowing her to maintain stability while rebuilding her life. She had engaged in extensive therapy to process the complicated emotions surrounding discovery that her marriage had been invalid for the final 18 months of its existence, and that her husband had been leading a completely separate life with another woman. She connected with support organizations for people recovering from deceptive relationships and found value in sharing her experience to help others recognize warning signs and trust their instincts when something feels wrong. Melissa Torres experienced a parallel recovery process, working through the recognition that the relationship and marriage she had believed to be real had been built on fundamental deception. She had left her position in Las Vegas and relocated to avoid the social complications and constant reminders of the situation. She pursued therapy to address trust issues that developed from the recognition that Christopher had deceived her so completely about basic facts of his life. Both women eventually connected and developed a supportive relationship based on their shared experience of victimization by the same person, recognizing that directing anger at each other served no constructive purpose and that Christopher bore sole responsibility for the deceptions that had harmed them both. 3 years following the Family Feud revelation, both women had made substantial progress in rebuilding their lives and had become advocates for legal reforms related to bigamy prosecution and relationship fraud. They spoke publicly about their experiences, emphasizing that deception of this magnitude represented a serious violation that deserved recognition and legal consequence. They advocated for improved mechanisms for verifying marital status and for enhanced penalties for individuals who entered into fraudulent marriages. Their advocacy work helped raise awareness about an issue that remained relatively uncommon, but that created profound harm for victims when it occurred. Christopher Donovan experienced enduring consequences for his choices and actions. Beyond the criminal conviction and divorce settlements that depleted his financial resources, he faced permanent damage to his professional reputation that prevented full recovery of his consulting practice. He rebuilt a modest career in technology, but never regained the income or professional status he had enjoyed before the exposure. His relationships with family members remained strained or severed, with many people unable to reconcile his deception and lack of integrity with continued association. He engaged in therapy as required by his probation, and reportedly to address the personality factors that had enabled such elaborate deception, though his progress and sincerity remained subjects of debate among those who knew him. 5 years after that remarkable moment, when a survey response inadvertently exposed his bigamy on national television, Christopher reflected on the situation in court, mandated counseling sessions. He acknowledged that his belief that he could maintain 2 separate marriages indefinitely had been fundamentally irrational, driven by narcissism and entitlement rather than realistic assessment of probability and consequences. He admitted that he had created countless opportunities for exposure through the elaborate structure required to sustain dual households and relationships, and that the Family Feud incident represented merely one of many possible mechanisms through which the truth would have eventually emerged. The incident became a significant cultural reference point in discussions about deception, bigamy, and the unpredictable ways that secrets can be revealed. Legal scholars analyzed the case as an example of how modern technology and media create new mechanisms for exposure of illegal activity. Relationship counselors used the situation as an illustration of the warning signs of serious deception and the importance of trusting instincts when patterns of behavior suggest that a partner may be hiding significant information. The phrase, "the survey card moment," entered common usage as shorthand for the unexpected circumstance that exposes carefully hidden deception. Steve Harvey continued to reference the Donovan family incident for years as an illustration of the principle that truth possesses an inherent tendency toward revelation regardless of how carefully deception is managed. He used the situation to counsel his audiences about the importance of building lives on foundations of honesty and integrity rather than attempting to sustain elaborate lies that create constant vulnerability to exposure. He emphasized that the specific mechanism of exposure in Christopher's case had been unusual and dramatic, but that exposure through some mechanism had been inevitable given the scope and duration of the deception. 10 years after the Family Feud taping, the incident remained a frequently discussed example of how game shows could occasionally serve purposes beyond entertainment by accidentally triggering revelations of serious misconduct. Documentary filmmakers examined the case as part of broader explorations of bigamy and relationship fraud in modern society. Academic researchers studying deception and compartmentalization used Christopher's case as an illustration of the psychological mechanisms that enable individuals to maintain contradictory narratives and sustain elaborate lies over extended periods. Rachel had rebuilt a successful life that included remarriage to a partner who valued honesty and transparency as foundational relationship principles. She maintained her advocacy work while focusing on career advancement and personal growth. She spoke publicly about her experience when opportunities arose to help others, but she had moved beyond defining herself primarily through the trauma of Christopher's betrayal. Melissa had similarly established a new life characterized by healthy relationships and professional success, having processed the experience as a painful but ultimately instructive chapter that informed her subsequent choices and judgments. The story of Christopher Donovan serves as a compelling testament to the inevitable fragility of deception and the principle that truth possesses an inherent tendency toward revelation regardless of how carefully lies are constructed and maintained. It demonstrates that individuals who build lives on foundations of dishonesty exist in constant vulnerability to exposure through mechanisms they cannot predict or control. It illustrates that the specific circumstances of exposure may vary, but that sustained deception of significant magnitude will eventually collapse under the weight of its own complexity and the statistical impossibility of indefinitely managing all potential points of failure. The case provides important lessons about recognizing warning signs of serious deception in relationships, trusting instincts when patterns of behavior suggest hidden information, and understanding that exposure, however it occurs, ultimately serves the interests of truth and justice, even when the immediate experience is traumatic and painful. It reminds us that honesty and integrity represent not merely moral imperatives but practical necessities for sustainable relationships and stable lives, and that shortcuts through deception inevitably create greater problems than they temporarily solve. If this account has provided valuable insight into the dynamics of serious deception, the inevitable vulnerability of those who build lives on dishonesty, and the importance of maintaining integrity and transparency in all relationships, please take a moment to support our channel by selecting the like option and subscribing to ensure you receive additional Family Feud moments and compelling narratives that demonstrate the power of truth, the consequences of sustained deception, and the resilience of individuals who survive betrayal and rebuild their lives with wisdom gained through difficult experience.